The best thing parents can do is to sort of gently encourage kids to do the things that frighten them. So not, I think sometimes as a parent, if parents get frustrated, they may say, well, what's the big deal? Like, just do it, and that sometimes can backfire.
Welcome back to Shrinking It Down, Mental Health Made Simple. I'm Gene Beresin,
And I'm Khadijah Booth Watkins.
and we're two child and adolescent psychiatrists at the Clay Center for Young Healthy Minds at the Massachusetts General Hospital.
So we're kicking off our new season today, just in time for Halloween. And we have a very special guest to help us make sense of dun, 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 specific phobias in kids. And so Dr. Susan Sprich, welcome to the show. And thanks for joining us.
Great to be here.
Actually, we should say welcome back, Susan, because Susan joined us a few years back to talk about cognitive behavior therapy, something I'm sure will come up again today. And I have to say, this episode continues to be one of our most listened to. So for those listening, be sure to find it on the media list for this episode. This was before your time, Khadijah.
I see what you did there, Jane. It's okay. I'll get you back. Don't worry.
Anyway, today, before we get started, a little background on Dr. Sprich. She served as Director of Psychology Training here at Mass General since 2021 and the Clinical Director of Psychology since 2022. She's also an Assistant Professor in Psychology at Harvard Medical School. Dr. Sprich is co-author of numerous chapters and articles on topics including psychosocial treatment for ADHD in adults and adolescents, trichotillomania, that's hair pulling, for those of you who don't know, and social anxiety. She served as the lead editor and second editor of the MGH Cognitive Behavior Therapy Handbook, published earlier this year, and she's an associate editor of the journal Cognitive and Behavioral Practice. And she won the American Psychological Association Outstanding Contributions to Continuing Professional Development Award in 2021. Dr. Sprich has an extreme clinical experience, has extensive Let me do that again. Dr. Sprich has extensive clinical experience in working with ADHD, anxiety, trichotillomania, obsessive compulsive disorder, and other disorders in the OCD spectrum. I could go on, but I'll stop there. And I'm so honored to have you here today, Susan. Khadijah.
Oh, okay. So I guess again, welcome back again, Susan, and I'm going to bring us back to Halloween for just a second, because this is quite timely, and a lot of folks, young and old, enjoy a good scare from time to time, and I do not include myself in that group because I do not like to be scared at all. So let me just make that clear. I remember back almost knocking my son down to get out of a haunted house one year. It was really not my thing, but anyway, I digress. So I want to start off talking a little bit about fear in general and the role that it plays and phobias. Questions I have are: what is fear? What happens when our brain is in, I guess, fear mode or afraid? So maybe this is something that we can all chime in on. But what's the difference between like a natural, typical fear and what is a phobia?
Yeah, I can start to answer that, but definitely chime in. I think when we get really concerned about a fear, it may start to veer into the realm of phobia, is when it's causing interference, so causing people to kind of not do things that they would otherwise really want to do that align with their values, or when it's causing them a lot of distress. So when they're spending a lot of time thinking about it and it's really, really upsetting to them, that's when we would start to look at a phobia as opposed to just sort of a natural fear.
And I looked it up. There is a fear of Halloween.
Oh boy.
Samhainophobia. I didn't. It's a fact. But let me just be more specific. So now that we know what a fear is, there is a big difference of a fear and a phobia. And I think what we wanted to talk about today is specific phobias. So where there is sometimes a legitimate situation that presents a danger, but can you help us understand the different situations, and let's start with the basics. I mean, there are 5 specific phobias, right? I mean, so there's animal, natural environment, and this might be a legitimate one, like, mudslides and storms and all that stuff that's happening with climate change, blood injection injury, and then situational ones like airplanes, elevators. So they're all labels for different specific situations. So what's the experience in each of these specific situations, and why would you call it a disorder?
It's a disorder when people really respond in a way that is extreme or is sort of out of line with what's expected, right? So, is anyone going to go jumping in a swamp full of alligators? Probably not, right? Because that there is legitimately a really high chance of getting injured or maybe killed in that situation. So that's not something that any of us would advise. But something like a fear of flying, while there is a very small chance that the plane is going to crash, right? Like planes do crash occasionally. On the whole, the cost to always avoiding flying would be much greater than the likelihood that that any given plane is going to crash. So it's people's response is sort of way out of line with the likelihood that the feared consequence is going to occur. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what about something that is pretty common? And for young kids, it may be normal, and for other kids, it may turn dark. That fear of the dark. So what would you have to say about that as a specific phobia?
Well, again, I think it's normal, right? It's sort of the fear of the unknown, right? You can't, you don't know what's out there in the dark. So things that may seem perfectly fine in daylight are a little bit more scary at night, and you just don't really know. You peek out your window and you can't see, what's out there. So it's frightening. So again, I think it's very natural that fear of the unknown, difficulty tolerating uncertainty. Those are very common things that, to varying degrees are difficult for all of us, right? But just like with other things, you're not going to advise someone to do something that is objectively dangerous, or you're not going to tell children or adults to go, out walking in the woods alone in the middle of the night, or certainly to go walking, down a dark alley by themselves late at night or something like that. But with repeated exposures to situations that actually are safe. So like, keeping the closet door open when children are sleeping or something like that, they will get used to it and stop being so afraid of it.
I want to think a little bit more about you with about what causes phobias, and I also want to mention it's incredibly common. It's actually one of the most common mental health conditions that we see in kids, specific phobias. So if any parent or caregiver is listening, really want you to know that if this is something your child is going through, please know that you're not alone. And it's nothing to be ashamed of. But I do want to think about or want to ask you what causes phobias, or do we even know? They're so common, but yet there also are many kids that don't have them.
Right. That's a great question. And I think it's one of those things that there's not one answer to that question. That sometimes when you speak to kids who have fears, they can really pinpoint a particular situation that, when the fear started. So if a child is afraid of dogs, they might be able to say, well, 3 years ago, this happened where either I got really scared by a dog, or I got bitten by a dog, or, a dog jumped up on me or something. And they can really target that one event as, the time when the fear started. And then there are other situations where, people have fears and they really can't pinpoint, when it started or why it started, or that even something, they might say, I'm really afraid of dogs. And, I can't even think of a time when anything happened with a dog. I just feel really, really afraid of them. there's also some data that anxiety is, genetically transmitted. So if family members have anxiety, kids will be more likely to also exhibit anxiety in some form. So there's sort of this predisposition if family members have anxiety. Also, there is the role of observational learning, that if kids see their parents being particularly worried about particular situations, they pick up on that, and they may also feel really worried about that situation. So, if a parent is not, is staying in the basement anytime there's a raindrop, and they're not going anywhere outdoors if they think there might possibly be a storm anywhere in the vicinity, children may pick up on that, and also feel afraid of bad weather or thunderstorms or whatever.
So it's estimated that about 1 in 5, I mean, it's estimated that 1 in 5 kids and adults will have some kind of a phobia. What are the most common ones in your experience?
Yeah, so often young kids are afraid of things like getting injured or getting kidnapped. They may be afraid of natural disasters, being separated from their parents, kind of more of a separation anxiety. Adolescents are often afraid of, kind of large open spaces, or being in claustrophobia, being in very small spaces. Also things like heights, or certain types of animals or insects.
So when should we be worried as parents? What are the signs and symptoms or behaviors or changes in behaviors that would give us cause for concern that this is more than just a typical fear, and we moved in the realm of a phobia? Are there warning signs that we could look out for?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think as parents, we're always trying to figure out, when do we need to be concerned, and when can we sort of let things go and hope that they resolve on their own. I think, as we talked about earlier, it really comes down to impairment. So is the child missing out on things? Are they avoiding things that they otherwise would really like to do? Are they, would they really like to go to overnight camp, but they don't want to go because they're worried that there are going to be bugs in the cabin at overnight camp, and so they're missing out on a potentially great experience because of the phobia? Is it causing them a lot of distress? Are they really, crying every time they think about going on a trip? Or, you force them to go on this awful trip to Disney World, it's because they have to go on a plane. So instead of being excited to, see the characters and go on the rides and do all that, they're really focused on just getting there, and how awful it's going to be to go on the airplane for them, and how, while they're there, rather than enjoying the time, they're focused on, oh my gosh, now I have to get on a plane, to go home. So when you start seeing the fear impacting kids' enjoyment of things, and also, impacting their decisions, impacting the things that they are choosing to do, and causing them to miss out on things with their friends, or academics, or things, family experiences, then I think, you start to think about needing to intervene.
And speaking of intervention, what do you do? I mean, I assume that we're not suggesting that parents, I mean, we can talk later on maybe about what parents can do to support professional help, but could you kind of walk us through, like, as a professional, what your technique would be to treat a specific phobia?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist and a psychologist, so my approach would be to use psychosocial treatments rather than medication, although that, medications are also an option. But with children, with everybody really, with phobias, we would work with them on sort of developing kind of a model, talking with them about, this is what we think is happening, and you have this strong fear response, and then it's causing you to engage in these behaviors. So the behaviors might be, avoiding certain situations. They might be seeking reassurance. So sometimes kids will, say to their parents, "Oh, can you promise me that this is a safe situation?" And they'll, repeatedly ask for reassurance. They might, older kids might do a lot of research, like, so look stuff up on the internet. But so trying to understand, like, what are the situations that the individual is avoiding? How hard would it be for them to kind of face their fear in those situations? Are they engaging in any safety behaviors? And then you would work with them to develop what we call an anxiety hierarchy. So basically it's kind of a list of different situations ordered from kind of, low to moderate anxiety, on up to, oh my gosh, this is kind of the highest anxiety situation I can imagine. So, like, to take an example with a fear of dogs, maybe we usually use a scale of either 0 to 100 or 0 to 10. So, using the 0 to 10 scale, we like to come up with a list of maybe like 10 different situations or more that range from like a 3 to a 10. And so you would try to get them to identify, like, what are the things that, so like with dogs, maybe if the dog's on a leash, that makes it a lower anxiety. Or maybe if it's a cute little puppy that's, 2 pounds, it might be lower anxiety than a big German Shepherd or something like that. So, thinking about what variables would make a situation a little bit easier, a little bit harder. And then you would try to work with the person to start approaching those situations and to not engage in any kind of like rituals or safety behaviors that might kind of interfere with the exposure.
So just for the audience's sake, I mean, people throw around labels. So back in the old days, they would call this systematic desensitization. And then it became cognitive behavior therapy. And now it's exposure response prevention. Now, the reason I throw those out there is because when folks go online, they're going to see all three of those terms. What's the difference? How do we understand the difference? Or are they all the same kind of thing in terms of kind of gradual exposure and reducing their anxiety at different levels?
Yeah, I would say they're pretty much describing the same thing, where basically what you're trying to do is to get the person to face their fears, right? To improve their learning. So they're going to learn that. So what we think happens in phobias is that people, they become fearful. And then when we become fearful of something, our natural instinct is to avoid it. Right. So, like, again, I think the dog phobia example is a good one. It's an easy one to relate to, where if I decide, maybe I have a bad experience with a dog, or maybe I don't, maybe I'm just like afraid of dogs. But I kind of have it in my head that dogs are scary, dogs are dangerous. If I go around a dog, something bad's going to happen, right? They might bite me. They're going to jump on me. It's not a good situation. And then because I have that fear, I start avoiding any situations where I might encounter dogs, right? So I don't have a dog. Maybe if I go to my friend's house, I ask them to keep their dog locked up in the kitchen so that I'm not going to be near it. When I go for a walk, I cross the street before I go by the dog park, so I'm not near any of the dogs. So that maintains my fear, right? Because I'm not near any dogs, so I never get the chance to learn any different, right? To learn that most dogs are fine. Most dogs are cute. Even if they jump up on me, they're not going to hurt me. They're just maybe going to get some mud on my outfit or, slobber on me or something. But nothing really dangerous is going to happen. So it sort of keeps that cycle going. So what we need to do is to give people new learning opportunities to see that, oh, like, I was around my friend's dog and I was able to pat them, and yeah, maybe they, snapped at me or they licked me or like, something, but nothing terrible happened, right? So we want to start giving people new opportunities to expose themselves to these avoided or feared situations, and then learn that the feared outcome isn't going to happen.
It can be hard as a parent to to know what to expect when you see something in terms of like what the course is. We often find ourselves thinking, is this a phase? Will it pass? But when we have kids that have specific phobia and meet the criteria that you kind of describe, where there's tremendous suffering or impairment, is it reasonable to think that most kids will just grow out of it? If we leave them alone and do nothing, will it kind of get better over time on its own?
I think it depends, right? I'm sure for some kids that will happen. And also it may sort of happen naturally. Like maybe they may, have a best friend that has a cute little puppy. And so they end up spending time with that puppy. And then they realize that maybe dogs aren't so bad, or maybe, their desire to go to overnight camp outweighs their fear that there might be bugs in the wilderness, and they go, and then they get a chance to see for themselves. So I think many times it does happen. But then, other times if that fear, just keeps festering, I don't know, like it may continue, and you may decide at some point that they need professional help or, some kind of intervention.
And no one wants to see their child, their loved one suffer. Is there anything that we can do as caregivers, as parents at home to support our children who are struggling with or dealing with phobias, maybe even as an augmentation or support to their other treatment?
I think the best thing parents can do is to sort of gently encourage kids to do the things that frighten them. I think sometimes as a parent, if parents get frustrated, they may say, well, what's the big deal? Like, just do it, and that sometimes can backfire. But sort of gently, encouraging them to face the situations that are challenging for them. I think modeling for them. So if you can model, I don't feel totally comfortable in this situation, but I know it's not dangerous. So, I'm going to go on the airplane anyway, because it's really important for me to, go on this family vacation, even though I don't feel totally comfortable flying. So things like that, I think, can really be helpful.
And so gently would not be, let's go to the dog park. That would not be gently.
I think you want to sort of collaboratively decide on goals. So I think for any of us, if somebody sort of forces us, even if I said, oh, I really want to overcome my fear of dogs, and then you said, okay, I'm your friend, like I'm going to drag you to the dog park and like lock you in there, I probably wouldn't appreciate it, right? So so just, I think this would be a good way, the conversations that we have with kids around this stuff are very much sort of collaborative discussions of like, this is what I think is going to be helpful for you. What do you think is a step that, a first step that would work for you or that you'd be able to do? If you kind of, push too hard, sometimes it can backfire. Kids can, if you took the child to the dog park and drop them off and left them in there, and they're really frightened and they're crying and they're running around and whatever, that's not going to be a good exposure exercise for them, and it's probably not going to help them overcome their fear.
And by the same token, what should parents not do? Like, an obvious example would be like, watch out, the boogeyman's going to get you. Have a nice night. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but parents might not take it as seriously, or they might joke about it. I mean, inadvertently. I mean, no parent wants to harm their kid, but I mean, are there things that you would advise parents to kind of avoid doing, rather than just being supportive and knowing what the exposure response plan is?
Yeah, no, that's a good it's a good question. I hadn't even thought of that one, Jean, but yeah, definitely not try to scare their children. But I would say actually the things that I find the most when working with parents of kids with anxiety is that they try to be too kind. They worry, they don't want their child to feel uncomfortable. And so they allow avoidance, allow escape from situations. So if a child feels really anxious, they, swoop in and sort of remove them from the situation, which I think, so many times is just very loving and well-meaning. And like my child, doesn't feel comfortable at this barbecue because, there's some clouds in the sky and they really worry about thunderstorms. So I'm just going to take them home where they feel safe, right? Which, in the moment is such a loving and kind thing to do. But then the message that it sends to children is like, you're not really safe. Like, I, as your mother, as your father, as your parent, don't think that it's safe for you to stay at this cookout because there's some clouds and there might be rain or maybe potentially a thunderstorm. And so it sort of sends, inadvertently sends a message that, your phobia is like right on target, and you can't be outdoors.
So the one mistake that's apart from my kind of over the top exaggeration is that parents, because they love their kids so much and they want to protect them, they're overprotective. That being said, is the treatment of necessity one that one does in reality, in real time, or can you do this online? I mean, do you as a therapist have to go out to the house and conduct the exposure response prevention? Do you teach the parents how to do it? Do you use online ways of doing it? So what are the practicalities? Because I'm sure that a lot of parents out there are going to say, okay, my kid's got this phobia. Who's going to come out to this house and guide me through it? What's going to happen?
No, that's a good question. I mean, I think there are a lot of good resources for parents. There are some workbooks, there's, online resources. So certainly before going to a professional, that's not a bad thing to try. There are, even for very young kids, there's some sort of picture books that talk about tools that kids can put in their toolbox and so forth. So, depending on the age, I think there are a lot of resources that are pretty well suited to kids of many different ages, even very young children. When people are, it, obviously depends on the phobia. So some things are more easily, brought into the office than others. So, something like, an insect phobia or something, you can get little plastic insects or make, spider cookies, or have, that with your discussion of Halloween, Khadijah, I think there are a lot of opportunities actually to sort of take something that could potentially be scary and say, great, what a good opportunity. Like, you don't like spiders? Like, my gosh, there's so many spiders around, climbing on people's houses. And, we have spider costumes and spider, this and that for Halloween. Let's take advantage of that. Like, this is a really great time for you to practice facing that fear because there's so many opportunities out there. But so, so some things you can bring to the office, sometimes with virtual visits, you can, it's actually nice. So maybe somewhat with phobias, but also with things like OCD, when people have their, rituals that they do that involve things in their home, it's actually easier to do it on video because you can say, okay, like, so go over to your sink and, bring me with you on your iPad and let's do it together. So I don't think you necessarily need someone to go out to the house. Occasionally, people will do home visits when it really seems like it's indicated. But, usually what I do is work on the hierarchy and sort of come up with the hypotheticals in the office. I always either have parents involved in that discussion, depending on the age of the child. But with, even with teenagers, usually we bring the parents in at some point. So I may have the conversation with the teenager that just by themselves, but then we bring the parent in and we share with them what the assignment is, like, this is what the child is going to do, and talk with parents about how they can support that endeavor. So what they should do, how they can support their child. And, often I find that parents are very grateful to be included and to have specific instructions about, how they should help. And also kids are really really grateful to have that discussion and to be able to say, well, like, it helps me when you do this, but not so much when you do that. So like when you make that monster noise, that doesn't really help me. But when you, just leave the door open a crack, but don't come all the way in, whatever, like that makes me feel better. Like that's a good middle ground. And I think that would be a good next step.
So there's a parent question. Okay. My 9-year-old son developed an intense fear of bees this past year. All kinds of bees, including wasps and hornets, but there were also bumble and honeybees, and he's never been stung before, and we're not sure why. It was so bad this summer that he stayed inside for most of the family cookouts. Well, let me give you an example of that. And I'm an avid gardener, and I buy plants to attract butterflies and honeybees and bumblebees. And my grandchildren, who are pretty young, they know that bumblebees and honeybees are really very docile and friendly, and they can actually approach them. This summer, we were out in the Catskills, and we were at a diner where during our breakfast, we were kind of swarmed by yellow jackets. And, we shooed the kids away and then literally captured a whole bunch of them under cups. And then we brought the kids back and we said, you're safe now. But you see this, what this thing looks like? This is called a yellow jacket. And those are the things that you need to stay away from, because they're not like the bees in Grandpa's yard, which are actually quite safe and friendly. And so what do you think about that as far as an approach, Susan?
I think that's a good approach. Yeah, because I think what you're doing is you're providing education, right? So it's not this all or nothing thing that all insects are bad or all bee-like creatures are bad or dangerous, right? You're telling them, you're teaching the children that most bees are fine, and the bees in Grandpa's yard are good, and they're healthy, and they're helping the flowers. But when you see this type of insect, they can be harmful. So you want to stay away from them. So you're teaching them to differentiate that it's not sort of an all or nothing thing, but there are certain times when they need to be cautious around insects.
So what about when our support efforts don't go the way that we're planned? So like, let's say they get, scratched by this dog, or they get stung by this bee when we're encouraging them to go to this picnic or to, pet this little puppy. And so that kind of reaffirms for them that any place with bees are not safe, or all dogs are dangerous. How do we recover from those instances? I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. And I think that happens. And I don't think the message is like bad things never happen, or like, when you're with a dog, like, you're never going to get scratched or licked or like, whatever. But more, even if that happens, like, is it something you can handle? Right. So even if, like little puppies have claws, you might get poked, you might get, they like to bite things. They might mistake your arm for like a dog chew or something. So, but even if that happens, it's manageable, like it's the fear is this big, and what actually happens is that big. And also, like I said, at the very beginning, we're not going to encourage anyone to do things that we objectively think are really dangerous. Right. So, if there's a dog down the street that we know has a history of biting people, and we don't feel comfortable being around ourselves, like, we're not going to even put that dog on the table as an option for the exposure exercise.
So thanks again, Susan, for joining us today. By the way, is there anything that we didn't talk about that would be important for parents or for young people themselves to know about specific phobias?
I think we did a good job of covering all the aspects of it. I mean, I think it can be a tricky issue because everybody has fears, and it's really a question, I think, of magnitude, of interference, of if that fear is getting so big that it's really causing problems. It's causing the person to feel really distressed. It's causing them not to do things that they otherwise would want to do, that's when it might be time to, really take a hard look at it and develop a plan, whether it's something, you start off with by just educating yourself, reading stories, getting a workbook or something, or if you feel like it's time to seek professional help to help you learn tools to get over it.
And of course, life's complicated because sometimes phobias don't occur in a vacuum. They occur in line with depression or a learning disability or an anxiety disorder of another kind, and they might require a bit more complex management from psychology and from psychiatry, even with the use of judicious use of medications. So that's when professional help can really help sort those things out, I think.
Absolutely.
This has been incredibly helpful, and we thank you for coming, and we hope for all of you listening that this was also, you found this also to be informative and helpful conversation. But to wrap up and to end on a positive note, is there anything, or is there something in particular you're looking forward to over the next week or so, Susan?
I'm going to a little yoga weekend this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that.
Oh my, that sounds really nice.
Well, thanks everybody. And don't forget, for those of you listening, that new episodes come out every Thursday, the third Thursday, not every Thursday. I wish they came out every Thursday because this is so much fun. But the third Thursday of every month. Please subscribe wherever you stream. And if you're feeling generous, please leave us a review. And we hope that our conversation helps you have yours. I'm Gene Beresin.
And I'm Khadija Brooke Watkins. We'll see you next time. I feel like I hear you telling me that I need to face my fears and go back to that haunted house, but we can talk about that offline.